Welcome to this web-based continuing education program for mental health professionals entitled Self-Care in Context. My name is Isabel Thompson, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I hold a PhD in counselor education and supervision, and I serve as an assistant professor here at Nova Southeastern University. The structure of this program will start with a brief introduction, moving to an overview of the learning objectives, understanding of self-care in context, in the context of your work and personal life, and exploring key definitions, including self-care, burnout, compassion fatigue, and compassion satisfaction. We'll also explore the relevant ethical codes, and there are opportunities for self-reflection embedded throughout this program. This web-based continuing education program is intended to provide mental health professionals, including psychologists, marriage and family therapists, mental health counselors, and other related mental health professionals with an understanding of self-care, burnout, compassion fatigue, and compassion satisfaction, as well as ways to prevent or reduce the likelihood of burnout. In addition, contextual environmental factors related to burnout will be explored, as well as positive aspects of working in the mental health field. So as mentioned before, the learning objectives. A major one is to understand those key definitions, self-care, wellness, and burnout, and going more in depth into burnout, understanding the three components of burnout, being able to differentiate between burnout and compassion fatigue, and understanding what compassion satisfaction is. Again, we will be exploring the relevant ethical codes related to sustaining well-being and preventing burnout, exploring workplace factors that may contribute to the development of burnout and those factors that may buffer individuals from developing burnout, and also to self-reflect on your own level of well-being and your implementation of self-care practices. So as we begin, I encourage you to reflect on your goals. So what are your goals for participating in this program? Most of you are here because you need continuing education credits. But beyond that, how can this be a meaningful process for you? I encourage you to self-reflect. Are you satisfied with your current level of well-being and your current self-care practices? If so, wonderful. I hope that this program may serve to support you in your journey and your self-understanding. If not, my hope is that this program can help you as a self-reflective process to move you towards your goals. So here's my personal answer. I practice self-care to experience greater levels of personal wellness and therefore to be able to serve others more effectively. I recognize it as an ongoing journey, and when I struggle to maintain my own self-care or my own level of well-being, I take time to reflect on what I need to do to regain a wellness foothold. So I've mentioned the word wellness. What is it? A major definition of wellness is a state of optimal well-being supported by a way of life that nourishes the body, mind, and spirit. How does this connect to self-care? Well, some authors have linked it in this sense, that self-care practices are related to the 6 domains of wellness: social wellness, emotional wellness, cognitive wellness, physical wellness, spiritual wellness, and vocational wellness. We've also mentioned the term self-care. Self-care has been defined as finding ways to replenish the self. So that's a very broad definition. A more detailed definition is the processes of self-awareness and self-regulation and the balance of connections among the self, others, and the larger community. So now I encourage you to consider, what do self-care practices mean to you? Are you currently practicing self-care? Are you satisfied with your current level of wellness, or do you want to increase your level of wellness? Again, part of the purpose of this program is to serve as a self-reflection tool to allow you to examine your own level of well-being and consider the practices and attitudes that could help you manage your job stress more effectively while maintaining your own well-being. Self-care in context is the title of this program, and each of us serve many roles in our lives as mental health professionals, as family members, as friends, as community members, and in other service and related roles. The hypothesis that guides this program is that by taking better care of ourselves, we can better care for others. Underlying that is the idea that our relationship with our own self matters. It does take time and energy to cultivate this relationship. I propose that this time and energy is worth it and that you are worth it. So I hope that this program supports you in your journey. Ironically, sometimes it's easier to implement self-care activities, and sometimes when we're most stressed out, it's the hardest to implement the activities that would actually aid us. So how can we sustain self-care practices when we're most busy, most stressed, and have the most demands on us? How can we be the best in each of our relationships and roles that matter to us? So going to the professional context here, why should we care about this? Well, mental health professionals need to maintain personal well-being and avoid burnout, compassion fatigue, and professional impairment. We'll go in depth into the definitions of each of those. To begin with, impairment is defined as when a mental health professional's personal distress interferes with his or her professional functioning and competence. What could be the problem with that? Well, impaired mental health professionals fail to meet professional standards of practice when providing clinical services and thereby put clients at risk. Now moving on to burnout. Burnout has been identified as a psychological problem among mental health and other helping professionals. And this was even back in the 70s. It was already being identified. It develops due to chronic emotional and interpersonal stress. And it's characterized by 3 factors or components: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and lack of personal accomplishment. Early on, it was also recognized that systemic factors in the broader institution or organization in which an individual worked are also significant in the development of burnout. Exhaustion, or emotional exhaustion, is considered an aspect of burnout, and it's the individual consequence or outcome of the overwhelmed stress response system associated with burnout. An important point here is that the fact that exhaustion is a necessary criterion for defining burnout does not mean it is sufficient. What does that mean? Well, exhaustion leads workers to engage in other actions to distance themselves emotionally and cognitively from their work, presumably as a way to cope with work demands. So here we come to the other components, depersonalization. This is considered an aspect of burnout, and it can also be described as cynicism or callousness. Now, mental health professionals, do you want to go to a counselor or psychology who's cynical, who's callous? Would you want to send a family member or relative to someone who was in that condition? I would answer no for myself, and I imagine a lot of you would as well. So this depersonalization is a big problem. It's a way that mental health professionals may seek to experience emotional distance from their clients. It can manifest in subtle ways, approaching clients by diagnostic categories rather than really starting with viewing them as an individual and viewing their unique strengths and their unique problems. Finally, the third aspect of burnout is lack of personal accomplishment. This is characterized by feelings of ineffectiveness, just not feeling like you're functioning well on the job. And in some cases, feelings of inefficacy appear to be a consequence of exhaustion or cynicism. In other cases, this aspect seems to develop in parallel with the emotional exhaustion and the depersonalization. Now we're shifting to another type of stress-related consequence for mental health professionals. Compassion fatigue. A general definition: the very act of being compassionate and empathetic extracts a cost under most circumstances. It is considered the emotional fatigue that emerges after mental health professionals are exposed to traumatized clients. The term traumatized clients here is important, as this is specifically associated with the development of compassion fatigue. Now, many of us do not specialize in trauma. Some of us do, but many of us encounter clients who have experienced some level of trauma. As it says here, mental health professionals are likely to provide clinical services for traumatized clients. If you do not have specialization in trauma and find yourself working with a lot of traumatized individuals, I encourage you to seek additional training, as additional training can help you more effectively cope with that clientele. So what's the difference here between compassion fatigue and burnout? Well, compassion fatigue is associated with providing clinical services to trauma victims. And it's also associated with the total number of hours spent providing services to traumatized clientele. Clinical services, counseling services, assessments, testing, all of that. Whereas burnout, by contrast, is associated with more general work setting factors rather than that specific factor of working with traumatized individuals. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the positive aspects of working in the mental health profession. One of them is the concept of compassion satisfaction. And it's not just a concept, it's a feeling that a lot of us are familiar with. It's that sense of satisfaction that mental health professionals experience as a result of their clinical work. So this term describes the experience of inner fulfillment and satisfaction that we have when we've helped someone else. And compassion satisfaction may reduce the risk of burnout. Compassion satisfaction is also potentially a reason why many of us chose this profession. We care about other people, we want them to be successful, and compassion satisfaction is that sense of accomplishment and genuine joy when other people are doing well. So now we'll shift to some self-reflection. Here are some questions. What activities could you refrain from doing to increase your level of well-being? What activities could you start doing to increase your level of well-being? One idea here is to reduce those activities that we kind of know don't help us cope effectively and increase the activities that we know have both positive consequences in the short term and over the long term. Further, connecting to the definitions we just explored, are you currently experiencing any symptoms of burnout or compassion fatigue? If so, what could you do to address these symptoms now before they get any worse? And then on the other hand, what are the sources of support in your life? When job demands or other roles and responsibilities are kind of being a burden on you, who do you turn to? What are the sources of support in your life? What reinvigorates you and gives you a feeling of zest in your life? And how could you include more of these activities in your life? Whether it's activities, a specific practice, certain people, a community, being of service, how could you do that more?